Hello and welcome back to the virtual classroom. I'm your host, Dr. Olmsted. As you can see, today's topic is Democracies of the 1920s in the wake of World War I. And subtitle, we're going to start seeing some problems that will cause World War II. Anyway, as always, before we begin, take a moment, hit pause on this video, jot down the lecture outline on the right, and pay particular attention to those key terms at your left. You got it? Let's get started. Now, of course, following World War I, and more specifically, following the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, there's a strong fear of communism the world over, both in Europe and the United States. The Red Scare. The first Red Scare, that is. The Civil War in Russia raged in the early 1920s, as the Bolsheviks were defeating their numerically superior white opponents. That's the first problem. The second problem, of course, there's the Red Scare, is of course the Weimar Republic in Germany. And so the Social Democratic Party, the SPD, had taken control of the government in November 9, 1918. This was part of the stipulation after the Tsar's government fell. They had to get the old German government out, get the new government in, so we could establish the peace treaty. Kaiser Wilhelm II will abdicate that same evening. The SPD became the largest party in Germany prior to the war, but fear of communist revolutions throughout the country prompted Philipp Schneiderman to proclaim a republic without official consent of other parties. But almost immediately, Germany's lack of democratic tradition made the Weimar's Republic hold on power very tenuous. The Weimar Republic had to rely on the conservative military groups to save them from communist outbreaks throughout the country. This extremely hurt the Republic's prestige. The government was given support by the military, provided the government maintained discipline in the military to root out Bolshevism. In effect, the Weimar became a prisoner of the German army. This included the Freikorps, a right-wing paramilitary group that formed after the war, that became the vanguard of anti-communist repression, and the Spartacists, a group of communists led by Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, who took control of Berlin for a week in January 1919. The elements of the Freikorps crushed this communist uprising, killing its leaders. Elections in January created a center-left coalition in charge of running the government. The SPD had the most seats in the German Reichstag, their Congress, but also had to share power with the Center Party and the German Democratic Party. The capital was moved to Weimar to distance itself from the Prussian tradition of Berlin. However, all this was bad, but maybe survivable. What was not survivable was the Treaty of Versailles. In 1919, the Treaty of Versailles that officially ended World War I, to Germans of all political parties, the Versailles Treaty represented a harsh, dictated peace that needed to be revised or repudiated as soon as possible. Specifically, Article 231, the so-called War Guilt Clause, that placed the sole blame for the war on the Germans. Germany was forced to pay enormous reparations to both Britain and France. Germany's military strength was severely weakened, and Germany lost land. France was eager to punish Germany, but even more eager to ensure its future security against German aggression. While Britain also sought to punish Germany, many Brits believed that a healthy German economy was essential to the healthy British economy, so there was kind of infighting in Germany. This included the famous John Maynard Keynes, who became the most significant economist of the 20th century, who criticized the Versailles Treaty, declaring that its punishing of Germany would damage the overall European economy. And he was right. And he was also right that it would guarantee World War II. Nonetheless, the Weimar government in June 1919 was forced to sign the Versailles Treaty, probably dooming the Weimar Republic from the very beginning. Conservatives in, including an influential military element, saw the signing of the treaty as the, quote, stab in the back, or the diktat, the dictated peace. A new constitution was created in August of 1919. It created within the Reichstag, the Reichsrat, the upper chamber that represented the federal states. The Reichstag, the lower house, would be elected by universal suffrage to supply the chancellor and the cabinet. To think of it in U.S. terms, the lower house would choose a chancellor. It's kind of like Speaker of the House, where the majority party selects its leader. The president would be elected for a 7-year term, and female suffrage was granted. But almost immediately, remember that was August 1919, almost immediately, 1920, there would be threats from the right. There was known as the Kapp Putsch in 1920. Conservative politicians and businessmen, with the help of disgruntled army officers, took control of Berlin in March and declared a new government. Conservative parties gave their support. At the same time, right-wing conservatives took control of Bavaria. Chancellor Ebert implored workers to defend the Weimar Republic. A general strike resulted, which brought the country's economic activities to a halt. The putsch collapsed as a result, and the republic was saved. Though certain conservative groups failed to take power forcefully, they continued to gain seats in the Reichstag. The SPD eventually withdrew from the government, leaving a fragile center-right coalition in charge. Then in 1923, the Ruhr crisis. As provided by the Versailles Treaty, the Allies announced in 1921 Germany had to repay almost $34 billion in war reparations. Germany's economy was still weak, and it could not pay all the reparations. In response, in 1923, France, led by Raymond Poincaré, occupied the industrial Ruhr region of Germany. In response, the Weimar Republic ordered Ruhr residents to stop working and passively resist the French occupation. Runaway inflation occurred when Germany printed money to pay their war debt, the war reparations. The value of the German mark, the German currency, went from approximately 9 marks per dollar in 1919 to 4.2 trillion marks per dollar by November 1923. Let me repeat that. This is astonishing. So the value of the German currency, the German mark, the German dollar, right? The German mark. In 1919, the value of the German mark was 9 marks to 1 German dollar. 9 German marks to 1 US dollar. So if you have a US dollar, it exchanged at a rate to 9 German marks. Pretty simple. In just 4 years, November 1923, that same $1 US dollar was now being traded for 4.2 trillion with a T German marks. Because the German government, the Weimar Republic, had to keep printing more and more money just to pay back their debt, the war reparations. The result of this, 1923, was the Beer Hall Putsch. This one led infamously by Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party failed to overthrow the state of Bavaria, and Hitler would be sentenced to 1 year in jail. Now, this is a very famous event in the German history, the rise of World War II, the rise of Nazism, and of course, for Adolf Hitler in particular. Adolf Hitler was originally sent in to spy on these more radical, far right-wing organizations, including the Nazi Party. Well, as he sat there and listened to them, supposedly spying on them, he became enamored by their rhetoric, and he joined them. And the thought was to use a putsch to overthrow the Bavarian government. And the Beer Hall Putsch, these men would ill-fatedly try to overthrow the Bavarian government and fail miserably. Hitler himself would be put on trial, where he would defend himself. But what he did in this trial was, he did not declare that he was innocent, but rather that he was justified. And this trial received worldwide attention where he was able to espouse his political ideologies. It made him famous. He was given only a 1-year prison sentence, in which case it was severely light. It was a very light, short jail term given by conservative judges who sympathized with his anti-Republican views. It is said that he could not come and go, but visitors could come and go as they pleased. And while he was in there, he wrote his most famous book, Mein Kampf, or My Struggle. Now, in his jail time, Gustav Strassmann would assume leadership of the Nazi Party. He called off the passive resistance of Ruhr and agreed to pay the reparations. Strassmann would restore Germany to normal status in the European community with the Locarno Pact of 1925. Let me correct myself. I did say he became leader of the Nazi Party. That was incorrect. Gustav Strassmann took leadership of the Weimar government in 1923 in the wake of the failed beer hall putsch. And this, for a time, seemingly pushed the Nazi Party back to the fringes. He called off the passive resistance in the Ruhr. He agreed to pay the war reparations. He supported Social Democrats and restored Germany to a normal economic status within the European community. In 1924, the Dawes Plan. The League of Nations would plan to restructure Germany's debt with U.S. loans to Germany to help pay back Britain and France, who then likewise would pay back the United States for their war debt owed to us. It resulted in a temporary German economic recovery that would last about 5 years. Unfortunately, it was short-lived because just 5 years later, the Depression is going to hit, and it's not just a U.S. phenomenon, it is a global phenomenon. Let's start with France. France actually had similar troubles to Germany. Death, devastation, debt of World War I created economic chaos and political unrest. Throughout the 1920s, the government's multi-party system was dominated by far-right conservative groups who supported the status quo and had the backing of the businesses, the army, and the church. In 1926, Raymond Poincaré was recalled to office. The government under him would slash spending and raise taxes to restore confidence in the economy. And again, 4 years later, the Great Depression is going to hit. In Great Britain, move me up here. The wartime trend toward greater social equality continued, helping maintain social harmony. The Representation of the Peoples Act 1928 gave all women aged 21 and over the right to vote. Yet, the concentration of wealth in Britain was more geared to the top than any other European country. In fact, in Great Britain, the top 1% owned 2/3 of the national wealth. And I got to tell you, every time that happens throughout the world, economic calamity follows. Unemployment in Britain became its biggest problem in the 1920s, reaching about 12%. Unemployment reached 12% in the 1920s. And Britain never recovered from its economic losses suffered during World War I. In 1926, a general strike was called with the support of miners who feared a dramatic drop in their already low wages. The strike failed, and the government outlawed such sympathetic labor strikes in 1927. They also saw a huge growth in social welfare, as the government provided unemployment benefits of equal size to the unemployed and supplemented those payments with subsidized housing, medical aid, and increased old age pensions. The Labor Party rose as a champion of the working class for greater social equality and briefly took power in 1924 for 9 months, led by Ramsay MacDonald. The Labor Party came to replace the Liberal Party as the main opposition to the Conservatives. But the Conservatives regained power by framing the Labor Party as pro-communist when it became officially recognized by the Soviet Union. Conservatives under Stanley Baldwin would rule Britain between 1924 and 1929, which then the Depression hits. The other lingering issue for Britain was, of course, the Irish question. After the Easter Rebellion in 1916, the extremist Sinn Féin faction gained prominence in Ireland, prompting a civil war between the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, and the Black and Tan, England's special occupation forces there. October 1921, London created the Irish Free State, from which the Ulster withdrew as part of the British Commonwealth, Northern Ireland. 1922, Britain granted Southern Catholic Ireland full autonomy after failing to suppress a bitter guerrilla war. But all these changes, so even though there were some positive things happening by the end of the 1920s, there was stability being restored in Germany, in France, Great Britain. Ultimately, it was being restored by pushing back on liberal ideas. And then when the Great Depression hits, it's going to give these right-wing extremists, these far-right parties, opportunity to come in and take over, take control. So, the Great Depression. Now, the long-term problems with the U.S. economy: weak international economy from World War I, overproduction, underconsumption, unstable banking, and certain weak industries would lead the U.S. to having half its population living below the poverty line. Likewise, overproduction of agriculture in Europe would drive prices down, hurting farmers. The stock market crash of 1929 may have triggered the Depression, but it was a lot of policy failures throughout the decade that would lead to that moment. In 1931, Britain went off the gold standard, and 20 other countries followed suit. 1930, the U.S. instituted an extremely high Hawley-Smoot tariff, which resulted in retaliation by 23 other countries. Please note that the very conservative Ronald Reagan once said that the Hawley-Smoot tariff made things far worse in the Depression, despite some recent trends of tariffs can save us. No, almost every economist, including conservatives, like Ronald Reagan, said that this moving Hawley-Smoot tariff made things far worse. And so while there has been some fragile optimism by political leaders only in the late 1920s, the decline of production began to have a domino effect across every country, except Russia, who maintained a command economy because of communism. Mass unemployment hit everywhere. In the US, it was 25% if you were white, 50% if you were black or brown. In Britain, it was 18%. In Germany, unemployment was 43%. Now, every nation had a different way of dealing with this. In the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal sought liberal reforms to bring the unfettered capitalism under government regulation. This was directly influenced by our old friend John Maynard Keynes, top right. The idea that the government could spend its way out of a depression or recession. In Scandinavia, their response to the Depression was very successful under socialism, where the government was able to maintain and control the economy through regulation and social programs. In Britain, orthodox economic theory followed after 1929. They abandoned the gold standard, they reorganized industry, they increased tariffs, reformed finances, cut government spending to balance the budget, although unemployed workers received barely enough welfare to live on. The economy did recover decently after 1932. But like the US, Britain came out of the Depression permanently after World War II began. In France, the impact of the Depression did not occur immediately, as it wasn't quite as industrialized as Britain, Germany, and the US. The Depression would increase class tensions, giving birth to a radical right that supported government reorganization along fascist lines. The Popular Front, this threat of fascism, prompted a coalition of Republicans, socialists, communists, and radicals, leading to a French New Deal, inspired by the US New Deal, that encouraged union movement, and launched far-reaching programs for social reform, complete with paid vacations and a 40-hour work week. However, this will fail due to high inflation and agitation from fascists. The French divisions over what actions to take in the Spanish Civil War will destroy the Popular Front, and France will remain politically divided as Germany continued its rearmament as Hitler took power in the 1930s, which is the topic for our next time. How did Germany and Italy deal with this? They turned to fascism. Let's have it for next time. So until then, take care, and bye-bye.